In the news this week, victim to oppressor, cultural advocates call for dialogue to reduce racial tensions. A WAMA News exclusive.
Heading to normality, WA's snap 4-day lockdown winds down.
No longer home, a group of Indigenous people forced out of shelter in Northbridge during lockdown.
And on Western Perspective, the relationship between lockdowns and mental well-being. Plus, Dr. Andrew Miller's weekly comment.
This is the Evening News with Ivan Leung and Sarah Smith.
Good evening. We have the exclusive story in just a moment. But first, a COVID-19 update, as Western Australia recorded one new local case overnight. A man in his 30s has contracted the virus. He is a known close household contact of case 1023, according to the Health Department. The department said he has been in self-isolation since Monday, 28th of June, with no new contacts and no new exposure sites. This marked the 6th case of Perth's COVID-19 cluster in the northern suburbs, with 398 close contacts have been identified or tested negative, and another 2,462 casual contacts also tested negative as well. A total of 6,190 people were swabbed yesterday, according to the department figures. On the issue of lockdown relaxation, WA Health Minister Roger Cook said this morning that Perth will return to the previous Level 5 restrictions by next week if the situation continues to stay under control. This means Perth Metro and Peel region will soon return to near normality activities before the snap 4-day lockdown.
So thank you to everyone who have done the right thing to make sure that they got themselves tested. Please continue to check the venues using the Safe WA app. It's just so important to make sure that we have that information readily available to our contact tracing teams to ensure that we can get on top of any outbreak wherever it occurs. Today we have 4,744 vaccinations are booked into our state-run clinics in Western Australia. There are more than 387,000 vaccinations booked in for the coming weeks and months. So I urge everyone, when you are eligible for your vaccine, to book yourself in for vaccination.
And you can watch Dr. Andrew Miller's weekly commentary coming up later in this broadcast. Don't go away. Racism can come from anywhere, including the multicultural community. That's the message Indigenous and CALT advocates want to drive home, and they're calling for a dialogue between their communities to promote greater respect, understanding and interaction in an effort to reduce tensions and misunderstanding. Kit Sanders has this exclusive report.
Multicultural advocates are calling for a greater dialogue between Indigenous and migrant communities, saying racism against Indigenous people is rife within the multicultural community.
There's so much hidden racism in Australia, and that's from people of colour towards our people as well.
Mervyn Eads says people pick up negative attitudes from the media.
I've always believed, when other cultures have come into this country, that they've been given a perception of our people by the non-Indigenous Australia. I don't believe there's any dialogue between multicultural Australia and the First Nations people. If there is, very little, but I don't see it.
Ramdas Sankaran of the Multicultural Services Centre of WA says prejudice can come from anywhere.
Racism, from an Australian perspective, is a very complex phenomenon. You can be a victim one day and a perpetrator the next.
He said part of the problem is a lack of education.
I think their understanding of Indigenous history and Indigenous rights and Indigenous concerns and issues are woefully inadequate. So I'm not surprised that, there is a level of discrimination against Aboriginal people from migrants and refugees.
When should a dialogue begin between Indigenous and CALT communities?
Look, that dialogue should happen, as I indicated a while ago, a lot long ago. But it should not wait too much longer. So my answer would be as soon as possible.
For Mervyn, changes come from greater interaction between the communities.
That's what it's got to come down to, is interaction and respect. It's all about respect.
Kit Sanders, WAMN News.
A group of Indigenous people have been left without shelter after being forced onto Northbridge's streets during WA's snap lockdown. WA Police moved them on, continuing outrage over a lack of housing and safety for Perth's homeless, especially First Nations people. Nelson Liu reports.
Brendan has been taking shelter here during WA's snap lockdown, but now he's been kicked out with nowhere to go.
This is life for us.
The Indigenous man has been sheltering at the empty fenced-off Beaufort Street property in Northbridge for 1 month in a group of around 10 First Nations people. But police have moved them on, moving them out onto the streets.
We had to move off the premises, but we are, which we're going to have to, find another spot, some other piece of concrete.
Brendan says they had permission from the property owner, but prefers to be housed, their stay only temporary. He believes they're now a greater risk out in the community, especially during COVID-19.
Obviously our sicknesses and illnesses, some people, I've got a heart condition, we're mixing in with society, and society is where the problem is, the issue, the sickness, and we tried to keep ourselves locked away.
Food donor Katrina was bringing food to the group while Brendan was telling his story. She's outraged that the group is being forced out.
It's disgraceful. We're in lockdown. People are homeless. It's cold. It's an unused building. As far as I can tell, they're not damaging it.
She believes they should have been allowed to stay.
There should be legislation that means that unused buildings are provided for people in need, and we've got too many people in need at the moment.
Homelessness remains a concern in Perth, despite the McGowan government claiming earlier this year that homeless people are being supported. Brendan isn't convinced.
There's going to be a whole new government come through and the same issue and the next the same issue and the same issue, and it's just shrugged off for someone else.
He just wants compassion for homeless First Nations people like himself.
There's a word called mercy. Try to have some. That's all I can say, yeah.
Nelson Liu, WAMN News.
Western Australia is one step closer to normal again following this week's snap 4-day lockdown.
Mask restrictions for both inside and outside will remain in place until Tuesday, and venues will be limited to the 4 square metre rule. From Tuesday to Monday 12th of July, masks will be required only inside, and a 2 square metre rule will be in place for venues.
We will see a much greater opening up of our cafes, restaurants, and we can get our school holidays going. And by the end of the week, we'll be back to the phase 5, which means pretty much everyone working, living, being entertained and undertaking their lives in the community pretty much as normal.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has announced a COVID New Deal that would see quarantine times halved for vaccinated travellers. The plan is a 4-phase plan that would see governments moving towards treating coronavirus like the flu when vaccination targets are met.
The state opposition is calling for the government to compensate small businesses suffering lost revenue due to the lockdown. Shadow Treasurer Stephen Thomas said many small businesses have still not received their $2,000 grants from the Anzac Day weekend lockdown. He said local businesses need more clarity from the government.
If the government applies a lockdown urgently and immediately, we accept the health need for that. But the government needs to accept that business has an impact and they need to contribute to that. When you're looking at a $5 billion budget surplus this year, there has never been a better opportunity to look after small business and industry.
Terminally ill people in WA will get more control over their end-of-life choices as voluntary assisted dying becomes law in the state. The historic, long-awaited legislation came into effect from Thursday, following an 18-month implementation period. People requesting access must make 3 separate requests to confirm their intent, and safeguards will ensure that voluntary access is without pressure. 37 practitioners throughout WA have so far been approved training to administer the service, while an additional 59 have requested access. WA is only the 2nd state to offer voluntary assisted dying, and the government says it's an additional option to minimise suffering and maximise quality of life.
The Australian Nursing Federation WA State Secretary Mark Olsen has warned that there may be a mass exodus of nurses if the government mandates COVID vaccination for aged care workers. The McGowan government is considering requiring all aged care workers to be vaccinated by August. An ANF survey has revealed that 31% would leave their jobs if forced to get the jab. Many suspected the results would be different with better availability of the Pfizer vaccine.
We need to get as much Pfizer vaccine into the state as we possibly can, and that will certainly alleviate a lot of our problems.
America's Department of State has expressed concerns over China's nuclear weapons, with new calls to reduce the risk of a full-blown arms race. It's reported that China has begun constructing more than 100 new missile silos in a desert area. A spokesperson from the department has said China's nuclear weapons stockpile is causing concerns. British entrepreneur Richard Branson has announced Virgin Galactic's next step to push for civilian space travel, with its spaceship launching in November this year. This means Mr. Branson will overtake Amazon founder Jeff Bezos in the race to be the first private company offering civilian space travel. Virgin Galactic's VSS Unity aims to hit space later this year, but factors such as weather and engineering issues may disrupt that timeline.
NASA has used 30 years of data from 3 satellites to discover that the upper layer of the atmosphere is contracting roughly 150 to 200 meters per decade. This is the effect of the carbon dioxide preventing heat entering the mesosphere, cooling the layer by about 2 degrees per year. This trend is expected to continue if human carbon dioxide emissions do not reduce. According to researchers, this means greenhouse gases will increase due to less heat making it to the mesosphere, meaning they will harder for carbon dioxide to escape into space.
And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on our website, wamnews.com.au.
From Sarah and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.